Guys, welcome back to another episode of Lighthouse. Lighthouse is our way of bringing God's light into your house. My name is Abhinav, and this is
Martina Malik.
And today we have a guest speaker, Marc Bestawros, talking to us about the topic, how do I hear God? Martina, give us an insight of what you think of this topic.
Well, there's heaps of ways that this could be seen, but I'm not sure, to be honest. There's a few things like prayer and just silence to hear God, but personal experience again of mine. One day I was really mad at God, super mad. This whole week I was just like, God, it's your fault that this happened and whatever. And then I felt guilty, and so I went, and usually how I speak to God, I write letters. And so I went into the early mass, went into the altar, and I wrote him a letter. I was crying. I was devastated. And I said, God, I don't feel you. I need you. Come. And then I put my head on the little chair that was there, and I honestly, as weird as it sounds, I honestly felt him as if my head was on his lap and him just brushing my hair.
Wow.
Yeah. What about you?
Very nice. Just, I think a bit more a recent story from one of the popes, Pope Carlos VI. One of the guys that came to visit him in the mill came to the early mass day. He used to pray an early mass every single day, and then he went to visit him, and this guy was already late for work. So Pope Carlos held him by the hand and he made him stay next to him for the next 2, 3, 4 hours. I think it was 3 or 4 hours. And obviously the guy didn't understand. He's thinking, I'm late to my job. I'm gonna get fired. Better start looking for a new job. Anyway, finally Pope Carlos let him go. On the way back, he heard that the route that he takes to work, there was actually, it was on a bridge, and the bridge actually collapsed.
Wow.
And everyone that was in their cars on that when it happened, everyone died. So that's one way that God talks to us, is through righteous people.
Yeah.
And that's my take. Yeah.
Wow, it's amazing. Yeah. So we have a hymn.
We do.
That is going to be sung quite shortly, and we'll see you guys there afterwards.
As I wait, your consuming fire burns with love over my sins. As you light up within me, I still look outside for thee. I have searched in every corner except those inside my heart. Oh, let me not fear to be alone with thee. I wait on the Lord to make glad my heart. I wait for your gifts, oh Holy One. I say, wait on the Lord. You have brought me out of comfort to cross high mountains and seas. Got to leave all my needs behind and proceed to the land you promised me. I won't stir up nor awaken love until it pleases thee. As you wait with me, I'll trust and be still, but you're now and you are here. I'll wait on the Lord to make glad my heart. I'll wait for your gifts, oh Holy One. I'll wait on the Lord to make glad my heart. I'll wait for your
Welcome back, everybody. That was a beautiful hymn that was just sung. So today we have a very blessed, very blessed to have Marc Bestawros as our speaker tonight.
Super blessed.
Again,
Super
a very
blessed.
debatable statement.
Amazing. He's going to talk to us about how do I hear from God?
Yeah. How can I? Yeah. So how can I hear from God? It's a good question because most people are going to ask it one way or another. How can I hear from God? I think there are two ways to look at this question. So the first way to look at it is, what are the different ways that I can hear from God? How can I hear from God? What are the different ways that God is speaking to me? Right? That's the first question we'll probably ask ourselves when we ask this question. And if that's the first question we ask, then it's a very silly question. Because if we look at it from a human perspective, how do we communicate with each other?
Speak.
We speak. Okay. How else can we communicate with each other? Text. What was that?
Visually, sorry.
Visually, yeah. Just looking at each other. We've figured out ways to communicate with people that are deaf, that are mute. Yeah. By sign language. By sign language. We figured out ways to even communicate with people that are blind, braille. We figured out ways to communicate with our siblings at home when, our phones get confiscated, the cup and the string. Yeah, everyone does that at one point in their life.
We're a bit past that.
Oh, sorry, my generation, my age is showing. But yeah, we figured out so many different ways to communicate with each other. We figured out ways to communicate with people overseas, right, interstate, and we can communicate with people in millions of ways. So what are the different ways that God can speak to me? There are an infinite number of ways that God can speak to me. There are an infinite number of ways that God can speak to me. If ever someone says, God isn't speaking to me, that is an immature or a misunderstanding of the nature of our relationship with God. Sometimes, yes, his voice can be a little bit, quiet. It can be a little bit, diminished. But we never say that he's not speaking to me. Because if I have figured out a million different ways to communicate with you and with people overseas and with people everywhere, then God has figured out an infinite number of ways to communicate with each of us as well. Okay, so what are the different ways God speaks to me? He speaks to me in infinite number of ways. He speaks to me through people. He speaks to me through the Bible, his word. He speaks to me through nature. He speaks to me through, all of creation. Anything he's created, he has a way to speak to me through that. Okay? So the question really isn't, what are the different ways God can speak to me? Because like I said, there are an infinite number of ways. We can sit here and just sit there listing different ways that God speaks to people. Right? The real question is, what can I do to hear God's voice more clearly? That's the question we want answered. If God is speaking to me all the time, in an infinite number of ways, then I just must not be listening, or I must not be hearing something. So what are the different ways what are the different things that I can do to hear from God? The way I thought to answer this question was to look at a specific story in the Bible about a great saint who heard the voice of God clearly and directly. Any guesses who this might be?
I want to say Moses.
Moses, no. They all did. To be honest, it's an unfair question because both the answers are right, but it's not the one I'm after. The one I'm after is Samuel. Oh. Right? So we'll read from 1 Samuel chapter 3 and we'll just go through it, almost verse by verse. And just take different points and see what Samuel did or maybe he didn't directly do so that the voice of God might be clear in his life. So 1 Samuel chapter 3 verse 1 says, "Now the boy Samuel ministered to the Lord before Eli, and the word of God, the Lord, was rare in those days. There was no widespread revelation." So before the whole story begins, already it's making it very clear the word of the Lord was very rare. It was very rare that someone would hear the voice of God in this day, right? But we know, because we have the gift of hindsight, we know that Samuel's going to hear the voice of God very clearly in this chapter. And what was significant about Samuel? It says, now the boy Samuel ministered to the Lord. He spoke to him, or God invites himself into Samuel's life because he was a boy, because he was innocent, because he was lowly, because he was humble. And so we too need to humble ourselves. Like Christ says, become like little children. We need to become like little children before we can even, think of hearing the voice of God. We need to humble ourselves. We need to make ourselves lower, like Samuel, who was a boy. Okay? We learned this lesson in a very, very harsh way when we went to visit Kenya. It was about 6 years ago. Again, showing my age.
Very young.
Yeah, very young, yeah. 24. 2014, sorry. And we went, that's not how old I am, by the way, I'm older than that. It was 2014.
It's like 29.
I didn't just yell out my age. It was 2014 and we went to visit Kenya. And the first couple of weeks we were a bit rowdy, we weren't really taking it seriously, we weren't serving. And the one thing that we really, really weren't doing was our quiet time in the morning. So we were sleeping in, we were meant to wake up 6 a.m. and do our quiet time every morning. Obviously we're tired from long nights, the night before we watched the World Cup final as well, it was Argentina, Germany, it was, we were
Great
rowdy,
service.
we had, great service, exactly. So we weren't really taking the service aspects very seriously. And then we get waken up, obviously we had all missed quiet time, every single person missed quiet time that day. We get waken up and we get instructed by Sayyidina Amabulus to go to the chapel. We go to the chapel and he gives us a grilling. He starts telling us off, bad. You guys aren't serious about service, you guys aren't taking this seriously, you're not doing your quiet time, you're not praying, so from now on there's no service. You're here to serve, you're here because you wanted to serve, now taking service away from you. There's no more service for this group. And he says, whenever a blessed group comes to this country, which is in drought 90% of the year, if they're blessed, they bring with them rain. But you guys aren't blessed because it hasn't rained a single drop since you came. So obviously we took that to heart. I remember as soon as, this went on for about 15 minutes, this rant. And at the end of it, people were crying, people were upset, people didn't even move. We were all so shaken. I remember the line for confession in front of Sayyidina was so long. I've never seen a line for confession that long in my whole life. I'm impatient, so I went to one of our priests. I'm like, yeah, you're free. Like, everyone's waiting for Sayyidina. I went to Father Marc and sat with him for a bit. Like, everyone was just spent that day in quietness. Yeah. We were humbled. And then at the end of the day, we all got into our prayer groups. We all had little prayer groups of 8. And in our prayer group, we had a priest by the name of Father Bestawros, who was a Kenyan priest. And he told us, all right, there's 8 of us here. Each of us is going to take a shift. And we're going to pray throughout the whole night. And we're going to ask God in humility, in lowliness, to accept our repentance and to bless this land. And everyone's going to take a shift, 1 hour. So for example, if you and me if us 3 are in the same group, I would have taken 11 to 12, then I would have woken you up, you do 12 to 1, then you wake up her, and she does 1 to 2, and whatever. We were a group of 8 guys, so we were all in the same cabin, and we woke each other up. So I remember I had the 2 to 3 shift, that was my turn. I did the 2 to 3, falling asleep, but whatever, I just read a little bit, read the Bible, prayed a little bit, and just managed to scrape through, woke up the next guy. And then I fell asleep. And at 7 a.m, the last guy to pray woke us all up. He's like, boys, wake up. I'm like, what's up? He said, can you hear that? I'm like, what is it? He's like, listen. We all listen.
I know what it is.
And it's thundering.
Yeah.
It's bucketing. And it didn't stop raining that entire day. And that wasn't all. We all got called into the church that morning. And one of the servants read out the quiet time from that day, which was from 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 12 to 15. And it said this, then the Lord appeared to Solomon by night and said to him, I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself as a house of sacrifice. When I shut up heaven and there is no rain or command the locusts to devour the land or send pestilence among my people, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. Now my eyes will be open and my ears attentive to prayer made in this place. Wow. If my people will humble themselves, I will open up the heavens. the first step to hearing the voice of God, to seeing his hand, is to humble myself, to make myself lowly, to become like a little child. So we keep reading. 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 2 to 4. And it came to pass at that time, while Eli was lying down in his place, and when his eyes had begun to grow so dim that he could not see, and before the lamp of God went out in the tabernacle of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and while Samuel was lying down, that the Lord called Samuel, and he answered, Here I am. Here I am. So what was Samuel doing at the time? He was sleeping. In what? In silence. The second step to hearing the voice of God is to spend time in silence. How can I hear from someone if all I do is speak? When you pray, you're taught to pray, the Thanksgiving prayer, then, Psalm 51, then you do your 3 to 5 to 7 to 12 Psalms, like, well, you did the whole 7 hours. I know Abba does the 7 hours of the Agbeya. You do that, and then you sing a bit of Tasbih, and then, the midnight prayer, and it doesn't stop. And then you say your personal prayers, oh God, give me this, give me that, give me this, I'm going to do that for this person, I love this person, make it happen, whatever. You do all those prayers, and then, our Father who art in heaven, and you go to sleep. And yeah, you prayed for a really long time, but when did you give God an opportunity to say something? Father Thomas Hopko has these 55 maxims for spiritual living. And one of the maxims is spend 20 to 30 minutes in absolute silence every single day. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's a very difficult practice. I tried. You try 2 minutes, it gets so awkward. Imagine sitting there 2 minutes, like, what am I doing? Like, I don't know what I'm doing, But it needs to be something we incorporate in our prayer lives. Because how can I hear from someone if all I do is speak and I don't take an opportunity to listen? And just for the sake of time, we'll just keep going through the story. Reading just verses 3 and 4 again. And before the lamp of God went out in the tabernacle of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and while Samuel was lying down, that the Lord called Samuel, and he answered, Here I am. Where was Samuel? So we know he was a boy. Who was Samuel? He was a boy. What was he doing? He was asleep in silence. Where was he?
In the temple.
In the temple, which is where he grew up. So the third step to hearing the voice of God in my daily life is to spend time in his presence, to spend time in his church, to spend time in his company, wherever that may be for us. There's a really beautiful book by someone named Brother Lawrence, and it's called The Practice of the Presence of God. And in it he talks about how we can invite God into our daily lives by saying very small, short arrow prayers whenever we're doing even the most trivial of tasks. So he says, for example, he'll be washing his dishes, and as he washes the dishes, he'll say, God, as I wash this dish from all its filth, please also come into my heart and cleanse it from all its corruption, all its filthiness, all its wickedness. And in that way, he invites the presence of God, into his daily life. King David, he says, one thing I've desired of the Lord, that will I seek, to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold his beauty and to inquire in his temple. He seeks that above everything else because he wants to see the face of Christ. He wants to hear his voice. Right? And then he says later in that psalm as well, the Lord says, seek my face. He says, my face, your face I shall seek. Seek my face. The Lord speaks to him. He hears that in his temple. He hears that in his presence. I can't hear the voice of God if I don't spend time in his presence. And so we keep going. We'll skip a few verses. So we know what happens. It's this, back and forth. God calling Samuel. He runs to Eli. And then, God calls Samuel. He says, here I am. Goes to Eli, says, here I am. And Eli says, go back. And, keeps telling him, what to do. And then in verse 9 it says, therefore Eli said to Samuel, go lie down, and it shall be, if he calls you, that you must say, speak, Lord, for your servant hears. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. What did Samuel do? So, who is Samuel? He's a boy, which makes him lowly, step one. What was he doing? He was sleeping in silence. Where? He was in the temple of God. And then what did he do after? He sought advice. After every single time he heard something that may or may not be perceived as the voice of God, he went and sought advice. So our step 4 to hearing the voice of God is to get counsel, to seek wisdom. If I'm unsure that, I'm hearing the voice of God, seek the advice of, a spiritual guide, my confession father. If I'm struggling in my prayer life and I'm not sure which direction God wants me to take, seek advice. God ordains these people, our spiritual fathers, our confession fathers, the fathers in our church. He ordains these people so that they can deliver his message, so that they can be his voice on earth. This is one of the ways that God speaks to us. And yet sometimes we try and hear his voice all on our own. He might speak to us, but why miss out on opportunity to hear from a servant of God directly? Why miss out on opportunity to hear from someone who's anointed by God? Because I'm waiting for God to speak to me directly? Remember step 1, be lowly. Go to this servant, lowly of heart, humble. I don't know what God wants me to do. In your wisdom, what should I do? And in that way you might hear the voice of God. It might be exactly what you needed to hear that day. And so we come to our final step, and we'll read verses 9 and 10. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, go lie down, and it shall be, if he calls you, that you must say, speak, Lord, for your servant hears. Again. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel answered, speak, for your servant hears. And then we know that God speaks to Samuel after. So our step 5, and I think the most practical thing that we can take from this whole thing is to get into the habit of saying the words, speak, Lord. Saying the words, speak, Lord. If I'm in prayer and I'm sitting there after I've prayed my, 7 hours of Legbeya, I've done my 51 matanyas, 41 matanyas, whatever, 100 matanyas, 400 matanyas, whatever. After I've done all that, I spend time in silence and I say, speak, Lord. Your lowly servant, humble in heart, innocent, is listening. I'm listening. Speak, Lord. There's a really beautiful quote by a man named Oswald Chambers, and he says, get into the habit of saying, speak, Lord, and life will become a romance. Every time circumstances press, say, speak, Lord. If you face a decision, large or small, speak, Lord. When you lack wisdom, speak, Lord. Whenever you open your mouth in prayer, speak, Lord. As you greet a new day, speak, Lord. And that first, thing he says, get into the habit of saying, speak, Lord, and life will become a romance, captures the imagination. And there's a really nice story, I'll just end on this, there's a really nice story about this missionary who went and he served in Asia. And we know in certain parts in Asia, it's illegal to preach the word of Christ. And so he got caught preaching the word of Christ and he gets thrown into this prison. But this prison was very unique in that all it was a hole in the ground. And it was closed by a vault. And in this vault, there's this little, chamber that the guards would open up and they'd throw food, they'd throw a bucket for him to, do his business, whatever. And that's all he got. And he was in this hole for 9 months, in complete darkness, in complete silence. Complete silence. Then when he gets out, malnourished. He stinks of his own, excretions. He's been living in darkness. And he goes to his church and he's glowing. He's smiling. So they ask him, what was it like? The 9 months that you just spent in complete isolation, in complete silence, in complete darkness. What was it like? And his response is beautiful. He says, oh, it was like a honeymoon with Christ. That 9 months, I have no doubt, he spent 9 months in prayer, and that prayer was complemented by absolute silence. Absolute silence. Waiting for the Lord to speak to him. And in that silence, you can almost be sure that he heard his voice, he saw his face, and he enjoyed the greatest of all romances, that being honeymoon with Christ, when I spend time in his company, in lowliness of heart, and it's only there when I can hear His voice. And glory be to God forevermore. Amen.
Wow, that sent shivers down our spines, I think. So
Maybe just yours. Abba's like.
Don't expose me, mate.
yeah. So we've got a few questions.
Yeah.
So first off, so you're always talking about prayer and like to be with God in prayer and silence and stuff. So how do I maintain the motivation to pray when I feel like my prayers aren't being answered?
How do you maintain the motivation to pray when you feel like your prayers aren't being answered? It's a tough question, because sometimes it does feel like all I'm speaking to is a wall. All I'm speaking to is, or it feels like, what we read in Lamentations, that He shuts up the heavens with a cloud. Because sometimes it feels like that. And, and I don't want to persist. I've lost all motivation to pray. But if that's the case, then I'm in very good company. I'm in very good company. Because there are many people, both biblical and both modern, that experience the same thing. The person that comes to my mind before anyone else is Mother Teresa. Does anyone know how many years she felt this dryness in prayer? Years, by the way. I've already given you a hint that it's a very long time.
More than 20?
Nah, not that long.
Less than...
The fact that it's years, if you say 2, that's plenty of time. But it was 11 years. 11 years she experienced this dryness in prayer, which she calls the dark night of the soul. That's like it's every night she prays and she doesn't feel anything. And so what I need to learn to do in prayer is to separate the feeling from the purpose. The purpose is to build a relationship with God. But that relationship with God isn't limited to that corner of my room. Because what Mother Teresa says after is, I saw His face, I felt His hand, I heard His voice in all the people that I serve. In the sick, in the wounded that I healed. In all these people, I saw the face of Christ more clearly every single day. I heard His voice clear as day. I felt His touch. Right? She felt God's presence. She had a relationship with God in the brokenness of the people that she served. So I need to separate feelings in prayer with the purpose of prayer. The purpose of prayer is to build a relationship with Christ, but that relationship is not limited to the corner of my room. It extends to my family, to my friends, to those who I serve. Okay? So how do I motivate myself to continue praying, even when I'm not feeling it? I motivate myself by seeing the Christ in everyone around me and knowing that it is my prayers, is only through my prayers that I would ever have the capacity to see Christ in the people around me and feel His presence. And maybe I'll hear His voice through those that I come across. And then there are practical things that I can do to motivate myself. If that's not enough, if that's not practical enough, because people might say, whatever, that's a bit of a fluffy answer. And fair enough, it might be a fluffy answer. There are things I can do practically to motivate myself to pray. I like to call it like manufacturing motivation. All right? Have you ever read the book? There's a book by a guy named James Clear. It's called Atomic Habits. Okay, it's not a specifically Christian book, but it's a great self-help book to read. And in it, he talks about coming up with inventive ideas, doing things that you don't have the motivation to do. In one like that's not the whole idea of the book. The book is about developing good habits by starting very, very small. But in one section, he talks about doing little things that might help give motivation to doing large things. Okay? For example, he wants to complete a crossword puzzle every morning. What does he do? He needs his coffee every morning. He needs a coffee every morning. So he tells himself, I can't touch that coffee until I finish a crossword puzzle. For example, I can't touch that coffee until I finish this crossword puzzle. So I can do similar things like that with prayer. Say, for example, I want to learn how to pray every single morning. How do I motivate myself to pray every single morning? One thing that I found is really helpful is sleeping with your phone outside of your room. It's helpful and impossible. Yeah. It's very tough. But one thing you can do is you get yourself an alarm clock, you leave it on your bedside table, and you leave your phone outside your room. And so what do you want to do as soon as you wake up in the morning?
Touch your phone.
Touch my phone. Who texted me? Facebook notifications. How many likes on Instagram? Whatever. You know, did I get a Snapchat? People still use Snapchat?
Yeah.
Yeah, people
Of
still use.
course.
Okay, like my age.
You have kick and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, who texts me? I want to touch my phone. So how do I motivate myself to pray? I say, my phone's outside my room. I don't leave my room until I've prayed. It can start off something really small. I just need to pray one psalm, get my foot out that door, touch my phone, and I'll be all right. Just need to pray one psalm. Then the next day I'll get in the habit, 2 psalms. A week later, I'll pray 3 psalms. By the end, we're all like, you know, Martina, who's singing hymns and doing the liturgy on her own, you know, like whatever. You know, I start really small, but I give myself something to motivate me to do what is really difficult. So the reason why I pray is sort of helps get through the dryness of prayer. But the motivation to pray, if that's what I'm struggling with in the first place, that I can manufacture. And that's, I think, where the second answer to that question comes in.
I have a question actually. What if we don't like the answer that God gives us? And I'll give you an example, a very cliche situation where you like someone and you pray about it. And you ask for the guidance of a priest or a spiritual guide and you do everything right. And it just doesn't work for some reason. And it's serious because people are left wondering, we did nothing wrong. We asked for the guidance of God. We did everything we were supposed to do. We made sure that God was with us in whatever that we did. You know, why didn't it work out? And that's God's answer to us, that it didn't work out. So what if you're not satisfied with the answer that God gives you? What's the first thing that you should do?
Again, that's a really, really hard question. You know what I like to do with hard questions? No, seriously, what do you think? Have you ever been in that situation, or what do you think?
Honestly, I used to play rugby, and the first thing that we were told,
Flexing on us.
a little bit. I had a really bad problem with injuries, but the first thing we were told when the game started to shift momentum, when things didn't go our way, the first thing that we were told was to trust the process. Trust the process, as in stick to the plan. So if your plan is to focus on defense for the rest of the game, focus on defense. But it's very hard with this type of stuff because people get hurt. People, based off this one situation, they're scared to start another journey with someone else, or even in any situation. Like it's very hard, especially when, like I said, you get the guidance of a priest or you get the guidance of a spiritual guide.
Yeah, you're right. It's a really, really tough question. And to be honest, every single person that has any sort of intimate relationship with God will go through that somehow. I'll tell 2 biblical stories and then 2 non-biblical stories. The first person that comes to mind is Job. You know, Job, who had everything taken from him. Job, who God himself was boasting about. He was bragging about him, telling Satan, you know, look at this guy, he's blameless, he's righteous. Have you considered him? You know, you want to start a fight? You want to start it with Job because I know this guy is going to win. He takes everything from him. He allows Satan to take everything from him. And what's Job's response? Naked I came, naked I shall return. And his wife tells him, curse God and die. Curse God. Like, he's taken everything from us. And then Job responds to her and says, you know, God who's given me everything in the first place, should I only accept the good from God and not the bad? Should I only accept good from his hand and not the bad? You know? Maybe we don't have the faith like Job. So what do I do to attain that same faith as Job? I think the best advice that I could give, and this is, you know, I'm sure there are other answers, but the best advice I can give is to live a life of thanksgiving. Live a life thanking God for everything, the good, the bad, all the little things. Start with all the little things in your life. Don't forget to thank Him for everything. The fact that you're here, the fact that we can speak to each other, the fact that you have hands and feet, and that you can eat, and that you came here safely, and that the weather's been nice, and that you live in a nice country. All these little things. Don't forget to thank God for these little things. Because when I thank God for the little things, I learn to be thankful in all things, right? And I learn to see His hand in the big things, and to hear His voice in the very big things. You know, the second biblical example I think of is Jacob. Jacob, I think after Job, Jacob and Joseph are probably, tied second for the people who suffered most in the Old Testament. Jacob lost so much. Jacob, 14 years, worked 14 years to get the wife he wanted. Yeah. He worked 7 years and then ended up with, not the one he wanted. Yeah. So the guy made him wait, Laban made him wait another 7 years, work another 7 years for the wife he wanted. He suffered. All the while, he was, divided from his brother. And then he loses the firstborn of his beloved Rachel, Joseph. And then he thinks he's been killed. And then he doesn't see him. And then when he finally sees him, after a life of complete suffering, at the end of his life, he's standing there, seeing not only his son, Joseph, but his children, Manasseh and Ephraim, in Genesis 48 or 49. He's standing there in front of them, and he's about to bless them. And he has an opportunity to say this very profound prayer to God. What does he choose to say? I thank the Lord who has fed me all my life. Rather than saying, I thank the Lord who brought us out of the famine and brought us to Egypt to be safe. I thank the Lord who has, brought my son, Joseph, back from the dead. I thank the Lord who not only brought him back from the dead, but allowed me to see his children. Before he says any of that, what's he say? Who fed me all my life. That's the most Egyptian prayer, that before anything else, they're thinking about the food. Now, thank God who's fed me all my life. But because he saw his hand in the very little things, he recognized that if God is giving me the little, he's going to grant me the big, but I have to accept all the bad that comes in between. I have to accept all the bad that comes in between. So I need to learn to live a life of thanksgiving. I need to learn to live a life of gratitude to God in all the little things. There's a non-biblical story about a little child. It was on Thanksgiving. He went to school on Thanksgiving. You guys know the celebration. They celebrate it mainly in America. He went to school on Thanksgiving, and the teacher told, had this exercise for all the children and told them, I want you all to draw something that you're thankful for. And so they all draw something. Someone draws their parents, I'm thankful for my parents, and they go up. Someone draws a bunch of their friends, I'm thankful for my friends. Someone draws a soccer ball, I'm thankful for soccer, have it in my life, whatever. Then this one kid draws a hand. And teacher's like, I don't think this kid got the point of the exercise, but whatever, brings him up in front of the class. Asks the kid, what is that? And he says, this is a hand. And the teacher says, is it your mom's hand? Is it a police hand? Like, whose hand is it? He says, this is the hand of God. Because from this hand, I have everything in my life. If I recognize that everything I have in my life comes from the hand of God, then I learn to live my life not only with gratitude, but with acceptance. Acceptance that anything that gets taken out is also taken out from his hand. Like Job said, shall I only accept the good, not the bad? I learn to live a life of thanksgiving so that I can learn to live a life of acceptance. That whatever God gives me can be taken away because it was given to me by him. It's a hard pill to swallow. But when thanksgiving, like any other virtue, is a practice. It's a practice, it's a learned virtue. And I need to learn it by starting off small. Thank you, God, for feeding me all my life. And in that way, I learn to accept whatever he gives me and whatever he takes away.
Thanks again, Marc, for the questions. Unfortunately, we've run out of time.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Thank you all for tuning into this episode. We hope to see you guys next episode. As always, stay safe and God bless. Good night.
Good night.